Negative visualization begins with a simple but uncomfortable truth. Everything you love is temporary. Your health, your job, your money, your relationships, even the body you walk in, none of it is guaranteed. Most people avoid this thought because it feels dark, pessimistic, or even cruel. We are taught to stay positive, to visualize success, to imagine the best outcomes, and to push away any image that might cause discomfort. Yet the Stoics believe that this constant chase for positive thinking leaves a person fragile. If you only rehearse victory in your mind, defeat will feel like a shock that breaks you. But if you learn to calmly imagine loss, hardship, and change, then when life inevitably shifts, you remain steady. This is the essence of negative visualization, or Premeditatio Malorum, the premeditation of evils. It is not about living in fear, it is about removing fear's power over you. The Stoics understood something modern culture often forgets. Fear thrives in uncertainty. When we refuse to imagine what could go wrong, our minds fill the unknown with exaggerated terror. We think, if I lose this job, my life will be over. We think, if I get sick, I won't be able to handle it. We think, if this relationship ends, I'll be destroyed. These thoughts grow because we never sit down and calmly examine them. We avoid them, we distract ourselves, we chase comfort. But the Stoics did the opposite. They sat quietly and asked, what if this happens? And if it does, how would I respond? In that moment, fear begins to shrink. Because when you imagine the worst calmly, you often realize it is not as catastrophic as your emotions make it seem. Imagine waking up tomorrow and learning you have lost your job. Your first reaction might be panic. You picture unpaid bills, disappointed family members, and an uncertain future. But the Stoic approach would ask you to sit with this image before it happens. Picture it clearly. Feel the initial discomfort. Then ask, what would I actually do next? Perhaps you would update your resume. Perhaps you would call friends. Perhaps you would take temporary work while searching for something better. The disaster slowly transforms into a series of practical steps. The unknown becomes known. The terrifying becomes manageable. And in that moment, you build what the Stoics called inner strength, not the strength of muscles or money, but the strength of character. Negative visualization also changes how you experience your present life. When you imagine losing something, you begin to appreciate it more deeply. Think about your daily comforts, the roof over your head, the food on your table, the people you care about. Most days you move through these blessings without noticing them. They become invisible. But if you pause and imagine them gone, even for a moment, their value becomes clear. Suddenly the ordinary meal feels like a gift. The quiet evening feels precious. The conversation with a friend feels meaningful. This is not pessimism. It is gratitude, born from awareness. Seneca, one of the great Stoic philosophers, often practiced this. He would imagine losing his wealth, his status, even his freedom. At times he deliberately lived as if he were poor. He wore simple clothes. He ate basic food. He slept on the ground, not because he had to, but because he wanted to prove something to himself. He wanted to know that if life stripped everything away, he would still be okay. He asked himself, is this what I feared? And by experiencing hardship voluntarily, he removed the fear of it. The worst-case scenario lost its power. In modern life, we are surrounded by comfort. We rarely go hungry. We have instant entertainment, instant communication, and endless distractions. But this comfort creates a hidden weakness. The more comfort we rely on, the more terrified we become of losing it. A slow internet connection feels like a crisis. A minor financial setback feels like a disaster. A small criticism feels like a personal attack. We become emotionally fragile because we never train ourselves to handle discomfort. Negative visualization is a form of emotional training. Just as a vaccine exposes your body to a small, controlled version of a virus so it can build immunity, this practice exposes your mind to control images of hardship. You imagine the loss. You sit with the discomfort. And over time, your mind becomes less reactive. When real challenges appear, they no longer feel like the end of the world. They feel like something you've already rehearsed. This does not mean you should constantly dwell on worst-case scenarios. The Stoics did not recommend living in a permanent state of anxiety. Instead, they suggested brief, intentional reflections. A few minutes each day is enough. You might ask yourself, what if today doesn't go as planned? What if someone criticizes me? What if I face a setback? Then you imagine responding calmly, rationally, and with dignity. You rehearse your character, not your success. Over time, this changes your identity. You stop seeing yourself as someone who depends on perfect circumstances. You start seeing yourself as someone who can handle whatever comes, and that is true confidence, not the fragile confidence that depends on everything going right, but the quiet confidence that remains even when things go wrong. Consider the fear of illness. Many people avoid thinking about it. They push it out of their minds because it feels depressing, but illness is a part of life. It is not a question of if, but when. The Stoic approach is to imagine it calmly. What if your body became weak? What if you had to slow down? What if you had to rely on others? At first, this thought may feel uncomfortable, but then you begin to see that your value as a person is not tied to your physical strength, your character, your kindness, your wisdom. These things remain even in sickness. By imagining illness, you detach your identity from your body. And when illness eventually arrives, it feels less like an identity crisis and more like a temporary condition. Financial loss works the same way. Many people live in constant anxiety about money because they equate their worth with their bank balance. But negative visualization asks you to imagine losing that money, not in a dramatic emotional way, but in a calm, logical way. What would you actually do? Where would you live? What would you eat? Who would still care about you? You begin to realize that much of what you fear is exaggerated. You might have to adjust your lifestyle. You might have to work harder, but life would go on, and that realization removes a huge weight from your shoulders. Another powerful effect of this practice is that it reduces attachment. Attachment is not love. Attachment is the belief that you cannot be happy without something or someone. When you practice negative visualization, you remind yourself that everything is temporary. You still love people. You still enjoy your possessions, but you no longer cling to them with desperation. You appreciate them while they are here, without pretending they will last forever. This creates a strange but beautiful emotional state. You become more grateful, not less. You become more loving, not less. Because you are no longer taking anything for granted. Every moment feels like a bonus. Every conversation feels like a gift. Every ordinary day feels like something to be appreciated, not something to be rushed through. Negative visualization also prepares you for disappointment. Life rarely goes exactly as planned. Projects fail. People let you down. Opportunities disappear. Without preparation, these moments feel like personal tragedies. But if you have already imagined setbacks, they feel like part of the natural flow of life. You respond with flexibility instead of frustration. The Stoics believed that suffering often comes not from events themselves, but from our expectations. When we expect life to be easy, any difficulty feels like injustice. But when we expect life to include hardship, difficulties feel normal. They become challenges rather than catastrophes. Think about a traveler crossing a desert. If they expect a smooth, comfortable journey, the heat and sand will feel unbearable. But if they expect a harsh environment, they will prepare properly. They will carry water, they will wear protective clothing, and when the sun beats down, they will not be surprised. Their expectations shape their experience. Negative visualization is about adjusting your expectations to match reality. Life includes loss. It includes change. It includes discomfort. Once you accept this, you stop resisting the natural order of things. And when you stop resisting, you suffer less. In practical terms, this practice can be simple. Each morning you might take a few minutes to imagine a small inconvenience. Perhaps your plans fall apart. Perhaps someone is rude to you. Perhaps you face a delay or a mistake. You imagine responding calmly. You imagine keeping your dignity. You imagine staying patient. Then, when the inconvenience actually happens, and it often will, you feel prepared. You recognize the situation. You think, I knew this was possible. And instead of reacting emotionally, you act wisely at night. You can reflect on your day. Ask yourself, what went wrong today? How did I respond? How could I respond better next time? This reflection turns every mistake into a lesson, and over time you become emotionally stronger. The ultimate goal of negative visualization is freedom. Not freedom from hardship, because hardship is part of life, but freedom from the fear of hardship. When you are no longer terrified of losing, things you become harder to control, harder to manipulate, and harder to break. You become stable, grounded, resilient. And in that state you discover something surprising. You start to enjoy life more, not less, because you are no longer living in denial. You are living in awareness. You know that everything is temporary, and that knowledge makes each moment more valuable. Negative visualization also reveals a deeper truth about control. Much of what you worry about is outside your power. You cannot control the economy. You cannot control the actions of other people. You cannot control the timing of illness, accidents, or loss. But you can control your response. When you imagine negative scenarios, you begin to see the clear boundary between what is yours and what is not. The event itself is not yours. The reaction is, and in that realization, fear begins to lose its grip. You stop trying to control the uncontrollable, and instead you focus your energy where it actually matters, on your character, your actions, and your choices. Many people think confidence comes from believing everything will work out, but the Stoics saw confidence differently. To them, true confidence came from knowing that even if things do not work out, you will still remain steady. It is the difference between someone who says, nothing bad will happen, and someone who says, even if something bad happens, I can handle it. The first person is relying on luck. The second person is relying on strength. Imagine two people preparing for a long journey. One refuses to think about storms, delays, or breakdowns. He believes everything will go perfectly. The other person calmly considers the possibilities. He packs extra food. He carries tools. He plans alternate routes. When the storm arrives, the first traveler panics. The second traveler adjusts. The difference is not luck. It is preparation. Negative visualization is that preparation, but for the mind. This practice also reduces envy. Much of envy comes from comparing your life to the seemingly perfect lives of others. You see someone with more money, more success, more recognition, and you feel that your life is lacking. But when you practice negative visualization, you realize how fragile all of these things are. That person with wealth could lose it overnight. That person with status could fall from grace. That person with beauty will age. When you see the temporary nature of everything, envy fades. You stop chasing what others have and start appreciating what you already possess. Another hidden benefit of negative visualization is that it sharpens your priorities. When you imagine losing your job, you begin to ask yourself, what truly matters to me? Is it the title or the skills I have built? When you imagine losing your possessions, you begin to see which ones are actually important and which ones are just clutter. When you imagine losing time, you begin to notice how much of it you waste on trivial concerns. The exercise strips away illusions and leaves you with clarity. For example, imagine you are told you have only 1 year left to live. Suddenly many of your daily worries lose their importance. The argument you had online, the minor inconvenience at work, the opinion of someone you barely know. These things begin to feel small, but the time with your family, your personal growth, your acts of kindness, these things begin to feel enormous. Negative visualization brings that clarity into your everyday life, without requiring an actual tragedy. It also strengthens your independence. When you imagine losing external things, money, status, comfort, you begin to build an identity that is not tied to them. You start to define yourself by your virtues instead of your circumstances. Instead of saying, I am successful because I have this job, you begin to say, I am strong because I act with integrity. Instead of saying, I am valuable because people admire me, you begin to say, I am valuable because I live with courage and wisdom. This shift is subtle but powerful. It makes you less vulnerable to the opinions and actions of others. Many anxieties are based on imagined futures. You worry about what might happen, but the images in your mind are often vague and exaggerated. Negative visualization replaces vague fear with clear thinking. Instead of a blurry sense of doom, you create a detailed, calm picture. And once the picture becomes clear, it usually becomes less frightening. For instance, someone might fear losing their home. But what does that actually look like? Would they move in with a relative? Would they rent a smaller place? Would they take on a different kind of work? When you break the fear into steps, it stops being a monstrous shadow and becomes a series of manageable actions. This practice also helps you develop patience. When you expect life to be smooth, every obstacle feels like an insult. But when you expect obstacles, you become more tolerant. You stop asking, "Why is this happening to me?" and start asking, "How can I handle this well?" The question shifts from blame to responsibility. The Stoics believe that life is not something that happens to you, but something you participate in. Every challenge is an opportunity to exercise your character. A difficult coworker becomes an opportunity for patience. A financial setback becomes an opportunity for discipline. A loss becomes an opportunity for resilience. But you can only see these opportunities if you have prepared your mind for them. Negative visualization also makes success less intoxicating. When good things happen, you enjoy them, but you do not become dependent on them. You know they may not last. This creates emotional balance. You are not overly excited by success, and you are not crushed by failure. You remain steady, like a ship that stays upright even when waves hit from both sides. In relationships, this practice creates deeper appreciation. Imagine, for a moment, that someone you care about is no longer in your life. Not in a dramatic or emotional way, but in a quiet, reflective way. Imagine the silence where their voice used to be. Imagine the empty space where their presence once existed. Then return to the present moment and see them as they are, right now. The irritation you felt earlier may fade. The small annoyances may feel less important. You become kinder, more patient, more grateful. This is not about expecting loss, but about respecting the fragility of life. When you recognize that nothing is permanent, you treat people with more care. You listen more closely. You speak more gently. You forgive more because you know that time is limited. Negative visualization also reduces procrastination. When you imagine time running out, you stop delaying what matters. You stop waiting for the perfect moment. You begin to act now. You write the message. You start the project. You say the kind words. The awareness of impermanence creates urgency, but not panic. It creates purposeful action. The Stoics often reminded themselves of mortality. Not to become depressed, but to become focused. They knew that life is short, and that most people waste it on trivial concerns. By remembering that time is limited, they made better choices about how to spend it. When you combine this awareness with negative visualization, you become both grateful and prepared. Grateful for what you have, and prepared for what you might lose. This balance creates emotional stability. You are not constantly chasing more, and you are not constantly fearing loss. If you exist in a calm middle ground. Another powerful effect of this practice is that it reduces anger. Many people become angry when things do not go their way. But if you have already imagined that people might be rude, that plans might fail, that obstacles might appear, you are less surprised when they do. And when you are less surprised, you are less angry. For example, imagine you are about to enter a busy day. Before it begins, you take a moment to reflect. Someone might misunderstand me today. Someone might be impatient. Something might break or go wrong. When these things happen, you recognize them as part of life. You think, this is what I prepared for, and instead of reacting with frustration, you respond with calmness. Over time, this habit reshapes your emotional reactions. You stop being shocked by difficulties. You stop feeling personally attacked by inconveniences. You start seeing life as a series of challenges to be handled, not injustices to be resented. Negative visualization also helps you handle success wisely. When you imagine losing what you have, you become less arrogant. You remember that your current situation is not permanent. You stay humble. You stay grounded. You do not let success turn into pride because you know how quickly it can disappear. This humility makes you more adaptable. If your circumstances change, your identity does not collapse. You are not the job you have. You are not the money you own. You are not the praise you receive. You are the person you choose to be in every situation. And that is the heart of Stoic practice. Not controlling the world, but controlling yourself. Not avoiding hardship, but preparing for it. Not clinging to comfort, but appreciating it while it lasts. When you practice negative visualization consistently, you begin to notice subtle changes in your mindset. Small inconveniences stop bothering you as much. Unexpected problems feel less threatening. You become more patient, more grateful, and more resilient. You start to walk through life with a quiet confidence. Not the loud confidence that demands attention, but the quiet confidence that comes from inner stability. You know that whatever happens, you will find a way to respond with dignity. And in a world that is constantly changing, constantly uncertain, and often unpredictable, that kind of confidence is one of the greatest strengths a person can possess. One of the greatest illusions people live under is the belief that stability is permanent. They believe their current routine will continue indefinitely. They assume the people in their lives will always be there. They expect their health to remain steady, their income to remain stable, and their circumstances to stay familiar. But life is not built on permanence. It is built on change. And the more you resist this reality, the more painful change becomes when it arrives. Negative visualization gently breaks this illusion. It reminds you that everything you see around you is temporary, not in a cruel or frightening way, but in a truthful way. When you look at your home, you remember that it is not guaranteed. When you look at your work, you remember that it could change. When you look at your loved ones, you remember that time is always moving forward, and instead of creating despair, this awareness creates appreciation. Think about how often people say, "I'll appreciate this later," or "I'll enjoy life once things settle down." But life rarely settles down. There is always another goal, another worry, another distraction. Negative visualization interrupts this pattern. It says, "What if this moment doesn't come again?" And suddenly, the present becomes more valuable than the imagined future. You begin to notice small details you once ignored. The warmth of sunlight through a window, the sound of laughter in another room, the taste of a simple meal, the feeling of a quiet evening without chaos. These moments were always there, but your mind was too busy chasing the next thing to appreciate them. By imagining their absence, you begin to see their presence more clearly. This practice also helps you detach from the fear of embarrassment or failure. Many people avoid opportunities because they fear what others will think. They fear losing status, respect, or reputation. But negative visualization asks you to imagine that loss. Imagine people criticizing you. Imagine failing publicly. Imagine not being admired. And then ask yourself, would you still be alive? Would you still have the ability to think, to act, to improve, to live with integrity? The answer is almost always yes. When you realize that your worth is not tied to the opinions of others, their judgments lose their power. You become freer to act according to your principles rather than your fears. You take risks that align with your values. You speak honestly. You pursue meaningful work instead of safe approval. Another area where negative visualization becomes powerful is in dealing with uncertainty about the future. Many people spend their lives waiting for certainty. They wait for the perfect job, the perfect partner, the perfect timing, the perfect opportunity. But certainty is rare, and waiting for it often leads to inaction. Negative visualization changes your relationship with uncertainty. Instead of asking, "What if this goes wrong?" and stopping there, you continue the thought. What if it goes wrong and I adapt? What if it goes wrong and I learn something? What if it goes wrong and I find a new path? This shift turns fear into curiosity. The unknown becomes less of a threat and more of an open space. You start to realize that many of the worst moments in your life were also the moments that shaped you the most. The job you lost may have forced you to develop new skills. The relationship that ended may have taught you something. The failure you experienced may have pushed you toward a better direction. What once seemed like disasters may now appear as turning points. Negative visualization prepares you to see future hardships in the same way. Instead of viewing them as the end of the story, you begin to see them as part of the story, and that perspective makes you more resilient. It also reduces your dependence on comfort. Comfort is pleasant, but it can become a trap. When you become too attached to comfort, even small discomforts feel unbearable. A delayed flight ruins your mood. A hot day feels like torture. A minor inconvenience feels like injustice. But when you occasionally imagine or even experience discomfort, your tolerance increases. You'll realize that you can handle more than you thought. You learn that you do not need perfect conditions to function. You become less fragile. This is why some Stoics practiced voluntary discomfort. They would sleep on the floor, take cold baths, or eat simple meals. Not because they enjoyed suffering, but because they wanted to remind themselves that comfort was not essential to their happiness. They wanted to know that if their circumstances changed, their peace of mind would remain in modern life. You do not need to take extreme measures to gain this benefit. Simply imagining life without certain comforts can have a powerful effect. Imagine going a day without your phone. Imagine living in a smaller space. Imagine eating simpler food. These thoughts remind you that much of what you consider necessary is actually optional. This realization creates a sense of freedom. You are no longer trapped by your lifestyle. You are no longer terrified of losing your comforts. You become more adaptable, more flexible, more at ease with change. Negative visualization also deepens your sense of responsibility. When you imagine losing something, you begin to care for it more intentionally. You maintain your health because you know how easily it can fade. You nurture your relationships because you know they are not guaranteed. You manage your finances wisely because you know how quickly circumstances can shift. Instead of living carelessly, you live deliberately. You become more present, more thoughtful, more aware of the consequences of your actions. Another powerful aspect of this practice is that it reduces regret. Many regrets come from taking things for granted. People regret not spending enough time with loved ones. They regret not pursuing their passions. They regret not expressing their feelings while they had the chance. Negative visualization helps prevent these regrets. By imagining the absence of what you have, you are motivated to appreciate it now. You make the call. You take the opportunity. You express the gratitude. You live more fully in the present, rather than postponing your life for a future that may never arrive over time. This practice changes the emotional texture of your life. You become calmer because you are less shocked by difficulties. You become more grateful because you recognize the temporary nature of what you have. You become more courageous because you are less afraid of loss. You start to see life as a series of borrowed moments. Nothing is truly yours forever. Everything is on loan. Your body, your possessions, your relationships, your time, all of them are temporary gifts. And when you see them this way, you treat them with more care and appreciation. This perspective also makes forgiveness easier. When you remember how short and uncertain life is, holding grudges begins to feel pointless. The energy required to stay angry starts to seem wasteful. You begin to value peace over pride. Negative visualization also brings clarity to your goals. When you imagine losing time, you begin to question how you are spending it. Are you chasing things that truly matter? Or are you chasing things that only look impressive? Are you building a meaningful life? Or are you just following the crowd? These questions can feel uncomfortable, but they are also liberating. They give you the chance to realign your actions with your values. They help you build a life that feels authentic rather than accidental. At its core, negative visualization is not about imagining disaster for its own sake. It is about removing illusions. It is about seeing life as it truly is: temporary, unpredictable, and constantly changing. And once you accept that reality, you stop fighting against it. Instead of demanding that life be easy, you prepare yourself to be strong. Instead of clinging to what you have, you appreciate it while it lasts. Instead of fearing loss, you accept it as part of the natural order. And in that acceptance you find a strange kind of peace. Not the fragile peace that depends on everything going right, but the deep, steady peace that remains even when things go wrong. This is the peace the Stoics spoke of. A peace built not on comfort, but on character. Not on circumstances, but on perspective. Not on control of the world, but on control of the self. And negative visualization is one of the most powerful tools for building that peace. There is a quiet strength that comes from accepting the possibility of loss. It is not loud or dramatic. It does not seek attention or praise. It is the strength of someone who has looked at life honestly and decided to live with open eyes instead of comforting illusions. Most people spend their days trying to escape unpleasant thoughts. They fill every spare moment with noise, distractions, or entertainment. They fear silence because silence allows reality to surface. But the Stoics chose silence deliberately. In that silence, they allowed their minds to wander into uncomfortable territory. They imagined the things others tried to avoid, and in doing so, they removed the sting those things once carried. When you first practice negative visualization, it may feel unnatural. Your mind may resist it. You may think, why should I imagine bad things? Isn't that just going to make me anxious? But the anxiety does not come from the practice itself. It comes from your resistance to reality. The practice is not about dwelling on fear. It is about facing it calmly, without drama, without exaggeration, and without panic. Imagine you are walking through a dark room. If you refuse to turn on the light, your imagination will create monsters in every corner. Every shadow will look threatening. Every noise will sound dangerous. But if you turn on the light, you see the room for what it truly is. The shadows disappear. The imagined monsters vanish. Negative visualization is that light. It exposes your fears to the clarity of reason. Many of the things you fear are not as unbearable as you think. The mind tends to exaggerate. It takes a small possibility and stretches it into a catastrophe. It whispers, if this happens, everything will fall apart. But when you calmly imagine the event step by step, you often realize that life would continue. You would adapt. You would find solutions. You would grow stronger. This realization builds a kind of quiet courage, not the reckless courage that ignores danger, but the steady courage that acknowledges it and remains calm anyway. You begin to trust your ability to handle whatever comes, and that trust becomes the foundation of inner peace. Negative visualization also changes the way you experience success. When something good happens, you no longer take it for granted. You know it could have gone differently. You know it might not last forever. And because of that awareness, you savor it more deeply. Success becomes sweeter when you understand its fragility. Think of a glass of clean water. For someone who has always had easy access to water, it is nothing special. It is just another drink. But for someone who has experienced thirst, that same glass of water feels precious. The difference is not the water. It is the awareness of its absence. Negative visualization creates that awareness. When you imagine losing something, you experience a small taste of its absence. And when you return to the present, you feel a renewed appreciation for what you still have. This is one of the most powerful emotional transformations the practice offers. It also teaches you to value people over possessions. When you imagine losing your belongings, you may feel inconvenience or frustration. But when you imagine losing someone you care about, the feeling is much deeper. It reminds you that relationships are far more valuable than material things. This realization can change your behavior. You may become more patient with those you love. You may listen more attentively. You may choose kindness over being right, because when you recognize how temporary life is, you stop wasting time on unnecessary conflict. Negative visualization also reduces the fear of aging. Many people fear growing older because they associate youth with value and age with decline. But when you imagine the alternative, the possibility of not growing older at all, you begin to see aging differently. Each year becomes a gift rather than a burden. Each wrinkle becomes a sign of time. You were allowed to experience. The Stoics often reminded themselves that many people never reached old age. By remembering this, they turned what others feared into something to be grateful for. They saw each day as something borrowed, not something owed. This perspective also reduces impatience. When you expect everything to happen quickly and smoothly, delays feel unbearable. But when you remember that life itself is uncertain, small delays lose their importance. Waiting in line no longer feels like wasted time. It becomes just another moment in a day that was never guaranteed. Negative visualization can even change the way you experience physical discomfort. When you imagine losing your health, minor aches and pains feel less significant. You stop complaining about small inconveniences. You become more tolerant, more resilient, and more grateful for the basic functioning of your body. Another important effect of this practice is that it reduces the fear of change. Change often feels threatening because it disrupts what is familiar. But when you regularly imagine different outcomes, your mind becomes more flexible. You stop clinging so tightly to one version of the future. You become open to multiple possibilities. This flexibility is a powerful form of freedom. When you are only comfortable with one outcome, your happiness becomes fragile. But when you can accept many outcomes, your happiness becomes more stable. You are no longer dependent on one specific scenario. Negative visualization also encourages humility. When you imagine losing your status or achievements, you realize how temporary they are. You stop seeing them as permanent parts of your identity. You begin to see them as circumstances that could change at any time. This humility makes you easier to be around. You become less arrogant, less defensive, less obsessed with proving yourself. You focus more on living with integrity than on impressing others. It also prepares you for unexpected opportunities. When you are not afraid of losing what you have, you become more willing to take risks. You are more open to change. You are more willing to step outside your comfort zone. And often that is where growth happens. Negative visualization also strengthens your sense of gratitude in a very practical way. Instead of waiting for something big to happen before you feel thankful, you begin to appreciate ordinary things. A quiet moment, a warm meal, a safe place to sleep, a friendly conversation. These simple experiences become sources of joy. Gratitude that comes from negative visualization is different from forced positivity. It is not about pretending everything is perfect. It is about recognizing that things could be worse and appreciating that they are not. This kind of gratitude feels more authentic, more grounded, and more sustainable. Over time, the practice creates emotional balance. You stop swinging between extreme excitement and deep disappointment. You become steadier, more consistent, less reactive. You learn to accept both good and bad experiences as part of the same process. This balance makes life feel less chaotic. You are no longer constantly at the mercy of your emotions. You become more like an observer, calmly watching events unfold and choosing your responses wisely. Negative visualization also helps you prepare for the ultimate loss, death. The Stoics did not avoid thinking about death. They considered it regularly, not to become depressed, but to become free. When you accept that life is temporary, many fears lose their power. You stop worrying so much about reputation, wealth, or status. You focus on living well while you are here. Death, in this perspective, is not an enemy to be feared constantly. It is a natural part of existence. And by remembering it, you give more meaning to the time you have. You begin to ask different questions. Instead of asking, how can I avoid discomfort? You ask, how can I live with integrity today? Instead of asking, how can I impress others? You ask, how can I use my time wisely? These questions lead to a more meaningful life. Negative visualization is not about expecting the worst. It is about being ready for it. It is about removing the shock that comes from unrealistic expectations. It is about building a mind that remains steady in changing circumstances. When practiced consistently, it becomes a quiet habit. You do not need long, dramatic sessions. Just brief moments of reflection. A few minutes in the morning. A few minutes at night. Over time, these small reflections reshape your perspective. You begin to move through life with less fear, less envy, less anger, more gratitude, more patience, more resilience, and more peace. And perhaps the most important lesson this practice teaches is this: you do not need perfect circumstances to live a good life. You only need a strong character. Everything else is temporary. Everything else can change. But your character, your ability to act with wisdom, courage, justice, and self-control remains with you in every situation. When you understand this deeply, fear loses its authority over you, loss loses its sting, and life, with all its uncertainty, becomes something you can face with calm confidence. If you'd like, I can. There is a subtle transformation that begins to take place when negative visualization becomes a regular part of your thinking. At first it feels like an exercise, something you deliberately sit down and practice. But over time, it becomes part of your natural perspective. You begin to see the world through a different lens, one that is clearer, calmer, and less clouded by unrealistic expectations. You start to notice how much of human frustration comes from the belief that life owes us comfort. People grow angry when things do not go as planned. They feel betrayed when circumstances shift. They complain when they face inconvenience, as though the world has violated some unspoken contract. But the Stoic knows there is no such contract. Life does not promise ease, stability, or fairness. It offers change, uncertainty, and challenge, and once you accept this, many frustrations lose their power. Negative visualization helps you build this acceptance. It trains you to expect obstacles instead of perfection. It teaches you to see difficulty as part of the journey, not as an interruption of it. When you stop expecting the road to be smooth, you stop feeling shocked when you encounter bumps along the way. This does not make life gloomy. In fact, it has the opposite effect. When you are no longer demanding that life be perfect, you become more open to the beauty that already exists. You stop focusing on what is missing and start appreciating what is present. Consider how people often postpone happiness. They tell themselves they will be satisfied once they reach a certain goal, once they earn more money, once they achieve a certain status, once they fix a particular problem. But negative visualization reveals the fragility of this thinking. It reminds you that the future is not guaranteed. The moment you are waiting for may never arrive. When you realize this, the present moment gains importance. You stop treating today as a stepping stone to tomorrow. You start treating it as something valuable in itself. You become more attentive to your experiences, more grateful for small pleasures, more aware of the people around you. Another transformation occurs in the way you handle setbacks. Before practicing negative visualization, a setback may feel like a personal failure or a cruel twist of fate. But after practicing it, the same setback feels expected. It becomes something you already accounted for in your thinking. Imagine an athlete who trains in all kinds of weather, rain, heat, wind, and cold. When competition day arrives and the weather is harsh, the athlete does not complain. He has trained for this. He knows how to handle it. But the athlete who only trained in perfect conditions will struggle when the drastic environment changes. Negative visualization is mental training for harsh conditions. It prepares you for emotional storms, and when those storms arrive, you are not caught off guard. This preparation also reduces the emotional extremes in your life. Without it, people tend to swing between excitement and despair. They feel ecstatic when things go well and crushed when things go wrong. But this constant emotional swing is exhausting. Negative visualization creates a middle path. You enjoy good moments, but you are not blinded by them. You face difficult moments, but you are not destroyed by them. You remain balanced, steady, and composed. Over time, this balance becomes your natural state. You stop reacting impulsively. You pause before responding to think more clearly. You act more intentionally. Another benefit of this practice is that it makes you more generous. When you realize how temporary everything is, you stop clinging so tightly to what you have. You become more willing to share your time, your resources, and your attention. You recognize that hoarding things does not protect you from loss, but using them wisely and generously gives them meaning. Negative visualization also strengthens your sense of purpose. When you imagine losing time, you begin to ask deeper questions about how you are using it. Are you spending your days in ways that align with your values? Are you investing your energy in things that truly matter? Or are you just drifting along, distracted by trivial concerns? These questions may feel uncomfortable, but they are also clarifying. They help you identify what is truly important to you. They help you focus your efforts on meaningful goals instead of superficial ones. As this clarity grows, you become less influenced by social pressure. You stop chasing goals simply because others are chasing them. You stop measuring your worth by external standards. You begin to define success on your own terms. Negative visualization also helps you handle criticism more calmly. When you imagine being misunderstood or judged, you become less sensitive to those experiences when they actually happen. You stop seeing criticism as a personal attack. Instead, you see it as part of life. This does not mean you ignore feedback. It means you evaluate it more rationally. You take what is useful and discard what is not. You remain steady, regardless of others' opinions. Another quiet benefit of this practice is that it increases your patience with yourself. When you imagine setbacks, you become more forgiving of your own mistakes. You stop expecting perfection. You recognize that failure is part of growth. Instead of being harsh with yourself, you become more constructive. You ask, what can I learn from this, rather than why did this happen to me? This shift in thinking creates a healthier, more resilient mindset. Negative visualization also changes the way you experience time. Many people feel as though time is slipping away from them. They feel anxious about the future and regretful about the past. But when you regularly imagine the possibility of losing time altogether, the present moment becomes more meaningful. You begin to treat each day as something valuable, not because it is extraordinary, but because it exists at all. This awareness creates a quiet appreciation for life's simple rhythms. You notice the morning light, the feeling of fresh air, the sound of footsteps on a familiar path, the comfort of routine. These things may seem ordinary, but when you imagine their absence, they become extraordinary. Over time, this perspective reshapes your emotional world. Fear becomes less dominant. Gratitude becomes more natural. You stop obsessing over what could go wrong because you have already faced those possibilities in your mind. And in facing them, you have discovered something important. You are more capable than you thought. You are more adaptable than you believed. You are stronger than your fear suggested. This realization creates a deep sense of inner security, not the kind that comes from money, status, or external stability, but the kind that comes from knowing you can handle change. And that is the most reliable form of security a person can have. Because everything outside of you can change. Circumstances shift. Opportunities appear and disappear. People come and go. But your character, your ability to respond with wisdom and courage remains within your control. Negative visualization strengthens that character. It trains your mind to stay calm in uncertainty. It prepares you for challenges before they arrive. It turns fear into preparation and loss into appreciation. And as this mindset becomes part of who you are, life begins to feel less threatening. The future becomes less frightening. The present becomes more meaningful, and your inner world becomes more stable, even when the outer world is not. You stop trying to control every outcome. You stop fearing every possibility. You begin to live with a quiet confidence, rooted not in luck, but in preparation. And that is the quiet power of negative visualization. It does not promise an easy life. It promises a strong mind. And with a strong mind, even a difficult life can be lived with dignity, resilience, and peace. As negative visualization becomes a habit, you begin to notice something else. Your emotional reactions slow down. Situations that once triggered instant frustration or fear now meet a calmer mind. Instead of reacting automatically, you pause, you observe, you consider your response. This pause is where freedom lives. It is the space between what happens to you and how you choose to respond. Most people live without that space. Their emotions control them. A small inconvenience ruins their mood. A harsh word ruins their day. An unexpected problem ruins their week. But the Stoic, trained in negative visualization, sees these moments differently. He has already imagined them. He has already rehearsed his response. And so, when they appear, they feel familiar rather than shocking. This familiarity reduces emotional intensity. It is similar to how a seasoned firefighter responds to a blaze. The fire is still dangerous, but it is not unfamiliar. The firefighter does not panic. He follows his training. He acts with purpose and clarity. Negative visualization gives you that same kind of training, but for the fires of everyday life. Another transformation happens in your relationship with comfort. You begin to see comfort as something to be enjoyed, not something to depend on. There is a difference between the two. Enjoying comfort is natural. Depending on it is dangerous, because comfort is never guaranteed. When you imagine losing your comforts, you begin to loosen your grip on them. You still appreciate them. You still use them, but you are no longer emotionally attached to them in a way that controls your peace of mind. If they disappear, you know you will adapt. This mindset creates a deep sense of independence. You are no longer a prisoner of your circumstances. You are not controlled by the fear of losing what you have. You become more flexible, more resilient, and more at ease with change. Negative visualization also helps you handle unexpected success. Without this practice, success can become intoxicating. It can inflate your ego. It can make you careless. But when you regularly imagine losing what you have, success feels less permanent. You enjoy it, but you do not cling to it. You remain grounded. This grounding protects you from arrogance. It reminds you that circumstances can change quickly. It encourages humility, and humility, in turn, keeps you open to learning and growth. The practice also changes the way you handle uncertainty about other people. Many of our emotional struggles come from expecting others to behave a certain way. We expect loyalty, kindness, honesty, and fairness at all times. And when people fall short of those expectations, we feel hurt or betrayed. Negative visualization prepares you for this reality. It reminds you that people are imperfect. They may disappoint you. They may misunderstand you. They may act selfishly or unfairly. When you accept this possibility, their behavior becomes less shocking. This does not mean you accept mistreatment. It means you stop expecting perfection. You stop being surprised by human flaws. And because you are less surprised, you are less emotionally shaken. You begin to respond with wisdom instead of outrage. You set boundaries calmly. You address problems rationally. You maintain your dignity, regardless of others' behavior. Another subtle effect of this practice is that it reduces the fear of starting over. Many people stay in situations that make them unhappy simply because they fear change. They fear losing stability. They fear the discomfort of beginning again. But when you regularly imagine losing what you have, starting over becomes less terrifying. It becomes something you have already considered. You realize that while it may be difficult, it is not impossible. You begin to trust your ability to rebuild. This trust is powerful. It gives you the courage to make difficult decisions. It allows you to leave situations that are unhealthy or unfulfilling. It frees you from the fear that often keeps people stuck. Negative visualization also helps you appreciate progress. When you imagine losing the skills, knowledge, or strength you have gained, you begin to value them more. You stop focusing only on what you have not achieved. You start recognizing how far you have come. This shift in perspective creates a healthier sense of motivation. Instead of being driven by dissatisfaction, you are driven by appreciation. You want to grow, not because you feel inadequate, but because you value the opportunities you have. The practice also strengthens your sense of self-discipline. When you imagine the consequences of neglect, poor health, financial trouble, broken relationships, you become more motivated to act responsibly. You take better care of your body. You manage your resources more wisely. You treat others with more respect. This is not fear-based living. It is awareness-based living. You are not acting out of panic. You are acting out of understanding. Negative visualization also deepens your resilience in the face of disappointment. When things do not go your way, you recover more quickly. You do not spend as much time complaining or blaming. You accept the situation and move forward. This ability to recover quickly is one of the most valuable skills a person can have. Life is full of unexpected changes. The ability to adapt without losing your peace of mind is a rare and powerful quality. Another benefit of this practice is that it helps you separate real problems from imagined ones. Many of the things people worry about never actually happen. They spend days, weeks, or even years stressing over possibilities that never become reality. Negative visualization brings these fears into the open. It forces you to examine them, and often, when you examine them closely, you realize they are not as severe as you thought. This realization frees up mental energy. Instead of constantly worrying, you become more present. You focus on what is actually happening, not what might happen. The practice also encourages simplicity. When you imagine losing your possessions, you begin to question how many of them you truly need. You start to value function over excess. You become less attached to luxury and more comfortable with simplicity. This simplicity brings its own kind of peace. Fewer possessions mean fewer worries. Fewer distractions mean more focus. You begin to feel lighter, less burdened by the need to maintain a complicated lifestyle. Negative visualization also changes your relationship with success and failure. You stop seeing them as absolute definitions of your worth. You begin to see them as temporary outcomes. Success becomes something to enjoy, not something to cling to. Failure becomes something to learn from, not something to fear. This balanced perspective keeps you steady, regardless of external results. Over time, the practice creates a deep inner stability. You become less reactive, less anxious, and less dependent on circumstances. You carry a quiet confidence with you wherever you go. You no longer need everything to go your way to feel at peace. You no longer fear every possible loss. You understand that change is part of life, and you are prepared for it. This preparation does not remove difficulty from your life, but it removes the shock, the panic, and the helplessness that often come with it. It allows you to face challenges with clarity instead of confusion. And perhaps the most important realization that comes from negative visualization is this: most of what you fear is survivable. You may lose comfort, you may lose status, you may lose possessions, but as long as your character remains strong, your life can still have meaning. This understanding shifts your priorities. You stop focusing so much on protecting external things. You start focusing on strengthening your inner world, because you realize that is the one thing that cannot be taken from you unless you give it away. And once you build that inner strength, life becomes less intimidating. The future becomes less frightening. You begin to walk through the world with a steady mind, prepared for whatever may come. As this mindset deepens, you begin to realize that negative visualization is not just a mental exercise. It is a shift in how you interpret reality. Instead of seeing life as something that should unfold according to your plans, you begin to see it as something that unfolds according to its own nature. And your role is not to control it, but to respond to it with wisdom. This change removes a great deal of unnecessary suffering. Much of human distress comes from resisting what is. We want things to stay the same. We want people to behave as we expect. We want outcomes to match our desires. But life rarely cooperates with these expectations. When reality does not match our wishes, we suffer. Negative visualization softens this resistance. By imagining change, loss, and difficulty ahead of time, you prepare yourself for the natural movement of life. When those changes occur, you do not feel betrayed by the world. You feel prepared for it. You begin to approach each day with a different attitude. Instead of assuming that everything will go smoothly, you quietly acknowledge that challenges may arise. You do not dwell on them. You do not obsess over them. You simply accept their possibility. This acceptance creates a calm alertness. You move through the day with open eyes, ready for both good and bad experiences. And because you are not clinging to a perfect outcome, you are less disturbed when things take an unexpected turn. Negative visualization also helps you understand the difference between discomfort and disaster. Many people treat small inconveniences as if they were major crises. A delayed train, a slow internet connection, an unkind remark. These things are uncomfortable, but they are not disasters. Yet the untrained mind reacts to them as if they were. When you regularly imagine true or serious illness, financial hardship, the absence of loved ones, small inconveniences shrink in comparison. You begin to see them for what they are, minor bumps on the road, not catastrophic events. This shift in perspective makes everyday life feel lighter. You stop overreacting to small problems. You become more tolerant, more patient, and more at ease. Another important effect of negative visualization is that it strengthens your sense of gratitude in difficult times. When you imagine losing everything, even a small remaining comfort feels meaningful. Even in hardship, you can find something to appreciate. For example, someone going through financial trouble may still have supportive friends. Someone dealing with illness may still have moments of peace. Someone facing failure may still have the chance to try again. Negative visualization helps. You see these remaining blessings instead of focusing only on what is missing. This perspective is not about denying pain. It is about balancing it with awareness. You acknowledge the difficulty, but you also acknowledge what remains. The practice also reduces the fear of uncertainty. Many people feel anxious because they do not know what the future holds. They crave predictability. They want guarantees. but life rarely offers them. Negative visualization teaches you to live without those guarantees. By imagining different possible futures, you become more comfortable with uncertainty. You realize that no matter what happens, you can respond with dignity and reason. This realization gives you a sense of inner freedom. You are no longer dependent on a specific outcome to feel secure. You carry your security within you. Over time, this internal security becomes your foundation. External circumstances may change, but your sense of stability remains. You are like a tree with deep roots. Storms may shake your branches, but they cannot uproot you. Negative visualization also encourages you to take better care of the present. When you imagine losing your health, you become more mindful of your habits. When you imagine losing your time, you become more careful about how you spend it. When you imagine losing your relationships, you become more attentive to the people around you. This awareness turns ordinary actions into meaningful ones. Eating well becomes an act of gratitude. Exercising becomes an act of respect for your body. Spending time with loved ones becomes an act of appreciation. You stop living on autopilot. You begin to live deliberately. The practice also makes you less materialistic. When you imagine losing your possessions, you realize how little they define your true worth. You begin to see them as tools, not treasures. You use them when they are useful, and you let them go when they are not. This detachment does not make you careless. It makes you free. You are no longer burdened by the fear of losing things. You become more flexible, more adaptable, and more at peace. Negative visualization also changes how you interpret setbacks. Instead of seeing them as signs that life is unfair, you see them as part of the natural order. Difficulties become expected events, not personal injustices. This perspective reduces resentment. You stop asking, "Why is this happening to me?" and start asking, "How can I respond wisely?" The question shifts from complaint to responsibility. Responsibility is empowering. It reminds you that while you cannot control everything, you can control your actions. And in that control, you find strength. Another subtle benefit of negative visualization is that it increases your emotional endurance. Just as physical training builds muscle, mental training builds resilience. By repeatedly imagining challenges, you strengthen your ability to face them. This endurance becomes visible in your daily life. You remain calm when others panic. You stay focused when others become distracted. You recover quickly when others give up. People may even begin to notice this difference. They may see you as someone stable, reliable, and strong, but what they are really seeing is the result of quiet, internal preparation. Negative visualization also reduces the fear of regret. When you imagine losing opportunities, you become more motivated to act on them. You stop postponing important decisions. You stop waiting for perfect conditions. You begin to understand that the greatest regrets often come from inaction, not failure. And this understanding pushes you to live more courageously. You take chances that align with your values. You express your thoughts honestly. You pursue goals that matter to you. And even if things do not work out perfectly, you feel a sense of peace, because you acted with intention. Over time, this practice creates a profound sense of acceptance. You accept the temporary nature of everything. You accept the unpredictability of life. You accept the presence of hardship. But this acceptance is not passive. It does not make you lazy or indifferent. It makes you strong, because when you stop resisting reality, you can focus your energy on responding to it wisely. You begin to move through life with a quiet readiness. You are ready for success, but you are also ready for failure. You are ready for comfort, but you are also ready for discomfort. You are ready for stability, but you are also ready for change. This readiness removes a great deal of fear. You are no longer waiting for life to surprise you. You are prepared for its possibilities. And in that preparation, you discover a deep sense of peace. Not the fragile peace that depends on everything going your way, but the steady peace that comes from knowing you can handle whatever comes your way. Negative visualization does not promise that life will be easy. It promises that you will be strong enough to face it. And in a world that is constantly changing, that promise is more valuable than any guarantee of comfort. You begin to understand that strength of character is the only true security. Everything else can be taken away, but your ability to think clearly, act wisely, and remain calm. That is something you can carry with you through every circumstance. And once you realize this, fear begins to fade. Loss becomes less terrifying. Uncertainty becomes more manageable, and life, with all its unpredictability, becomes something you can face with courage and calm confidence. As you continue to practice negative visualization, you begin to notice that your fears start to lose their sharp edges. What once felt overwhelming now feels manageable. What once seemed catastrophic now appears as just another possible turn in the road. This change does not happen overnight. It happens gradually, through repeated reflection and quiet acceptance. But once it takes root, it changes the entire way you experience life. You begin to understand that fear is often a product of imagination, not reality. The mind has a tendency to exaggerate danger. It turns small risks into enormous threats. It paints dramatic pictures of loss and suffering. But when you deliberately imagine these scenarios in a calm, rational way, the drama disappears. You see the situation more clearly, and clarity weakens fear. For example, someone might fear losing their job. They imagine homelessness, poverty, and despair. But when they sit down and calmly think through the steps, the situation becomes less frightening. They may realize they have savings. They may have skills that are in demand. They may have friends or family who could support them temporarily. The situation is still difficult, but it is not the end of the world. This realization gives you a sense of inner strength. You stop seeing yourself as someone who would collapse under pressure. You begin to see yourself as someone who can adapt, adjust, and move forward. Negative visualization also changes the way you approach success. Instead of clinging to it, you treat it as something temporary. You enjoy it while it lasts, but you do not depend on it for your sense of worth. This makes success less stressful. You no longer feel the pressure to maintain it at all costs. You begin to understand that success and failure are both part of the same process. They are not permanent states. They are temporary outcomes, and what truly matters is how you respond to them. This perspective keeps you steady. You do not become arrogant in success, and you do not become hopeless in failure. You remain balanced, regardless of external circumstances. Negative visualization also teaches you to appreciate simplicity. When you imagine losing luxury, you begin to see how little you truly need. You realize that many of your comforts are not essential to your happiness. They are pleasant, but they are not necessary. This realization can be liberating. You stop feeling trapped by your lifestyle. You stop believing that you need more and more to be satisfied. You become content with less, and this contentment brings a deep sense of peace. It also makes you more resilient. When you are comfortable with simplicity, you are less afraid of hardship. You know that even in difficult circumstances, you can still live with dignity. Another important change occurs in your relationship with time. Negative visualization reminds you that time is limited. It encourages you to treat it as something precious. You stop wasting it on trivial concerns. You stop postponing meaningful actions. You begin to ask yourself more honest questions. Are you spending your time in ways that reflect your values? Are you nurturing the relationships that matter? Are you using your energy wisely? These questions may feel uncomfortable, but they also bring clarity that help you align your actions with what truly matters. Negative visualization also deepens your compassion for others. When you imagine losing what you have, you become more aware of how fragile life is for everyone. You realize that other people are also facing uncertainties, fears, and struggles. This awareness softens your judgments. You become less harsh, less critical, and more understanding. You recognize that everyone is carrying their own burdens, even if you cannot see them. As a result, your interactions with others become more patient and kind. You listen more carefully. You speak more thoughtfully. You value connection over conflict. The practice also reduces the fear of change. Many people cling to familiar situations. Even when those situations are not healthy, they fear the unknown more than they dislike the present. But when you regularly imagine different outcomes, the unknown becomes less intimidating. You begin to see change as something natural, something inevitable, something that can even lead to growth. Instead of resisting it, you start to work with it. This flexibility is one of the greatest strengths you can develop. It allows you to adapt to new situations without losing your peace of mind. It keeps you from becoming rigid or fearful. Negative visualization also prepares you for moments of disappointment. When plans fall apart, you do not feel shocked or betrayed. You recognize that setbacks are part of life. You adjust your course and continue moving forward. This ability to recover quickly is a powerful advantage. It keeps you from becoming stuck in frustration or self-pity. It allows you to maintain momentum, even when things go wrong. Another quiet benefit of this practice is that it reduces the fear of judgment. When you imagine losing approval or status, you realize that your core self remains unchanged. You are still capable of thinking, acting, and growing. Your worth does not disappear just because someone disapproves of you. This realization gives you courage. You become less concerned with pleasing everyone. You focus more on living according to your values. And this authenticity brings a deeper sense of satisfaction than approval ever could. Negative visualization also changes how you experience everyday comforts. When you imagine their absence, they become more meaningful. A comfortable bed, a warm meal, a peaceful evening, these simple things take on new value. You stop treating them as ordinary. You begin to see them as small gifts. And this shift creates a steady sense of gratitude. Over time, gratitude becomes your default state, not because everything is perfect, but because you recognize how much you still have. Even in difficult moments, you can find something to appreciate. This perspective creates emotional stability. You are no longer dependent on perfect conditions to feel content. You carry a quiet sense of appreciation with you, regardless of circumstances. Negative visualization also helps you face the idea of mortality with greater calm. Instead of fearing death constantly, you acknowledge it as a natural part of life. This acknowledgement removes some of its power over your thoughts. You begin to see death not as an enemy but as a reminder that your time is limited, a reminder to live with intention, a reminder to focus on what truly matters. This awareness gives your actions more meaning. You stop wasting time on trivial pursuits. You start investing your energy in things that align with your values. As this mindset grows, you develop a quiet confidence, not the loud, showy confidence that depends on external success, but the steady confidence that comes from inner preparation. You know that life will not always be easy. You know that loss and change are inevitable, but you also know that you can handle them. You have already faced them in your mind. You have already prepared your response. This preparation gives you strength. It allows you to move through life with less fear and more clarity. It frees you from the constant anxiety about what might happen. And in that freedom, you find peace. A peace that does not depend on circumstances. A peace that comes from within. A peace built on acceptance, preparation, and inner strength. That is the quiet gift of negative visualization. It does not make life easier. It makes you stronger. And when you are strong, even the difficulties of life become more manageable. You stop seeing hardship as something that destroys you. You start seeing it as something that shapes you. And with each challenge you face, your character becomes more refined, more resilient, and more steady. In the end, negative visualization teaches you one simple but powerful lesson. Everything you have can be taken away, but your ability to respond with wisdom and courage is always yours to keep. And that ability is the true source of peace. As this way of thinking becomes part of your daily awareness, you begin to notice how differently you move through the world. Situations that once felt urgent and overwhelming now feel smaller, more manageable. You no longer see every problem as a crisis. You see it as an event, something to be faced, handled, and learned from. Negative visualization slowly dissolves the illusion that comfort is the natural state of life. Many people believe that life should feel easy, smooth, and pleasant most of the time. When it does not, they feel cheated or unlucky. But the Stoic sees life differently. The Stoic understands that difficulty is not an exception. It is part of the structure of existence. By imagining setbacks before they occur, you stop being surprised by them. You stop feeling as though the world has wronged you. You begin to treat challenges as expected guests rather than unwanted intruders. This shift removes a great deal of emotional resistance. You are no longer fighting against reality. You are working with it. And when you stop resisting what cannot be changed, you conserve your energy for what can be changed. Another transformation happens in the way you experience desire. When you constantly imagine gaining more, your desires grow endlessly. You always want the next thing, the next upgrade, the next achievement. But when you imagine losing what you already have, your desires begin to shrink. You start to appreciate what is already in your life. The urge to chase more and more begins to soften. You realize that much of what you once wanted is not essential to your happiness. This does not mean you stop pursuing goals. It means your goals become more thoughtful. You pursue what truly matters, not what simply looks impressive or feels temporarily exciting. Negative visualization also changes how you interpret other people's success. Instead of feeling envy, you remember the fragility of all external things. You understand that success can be lost. Wealth can disappear. Fame can fade. Health can decline. This awareness does not make you cynical. It makes you realistic. You stop comparing your life to the surface-level appearances of others. You begin to focus on what cannot be taken away: your character, your values, your actions. This shift brings a quiet contentment. You no longer feel the constant pressure to keep up with others. You define success in your own terms, based on inner strength rather than external approval. Negative visualization also helps. You deal with uncertainty about the future. Many people are haunted by questions about what might happen. They worry about losing their job, their health, or their relationships. They try to predict the future in order to feel safe. But the future is unpredictable, and no amount of worrying can change that. Negative visualization teaches you to accept this uncertainty. It shows you that even if the future brings difficulty, you can still respond with dignity. This realization reduces anxiety. You stop trying to control every possible outcome. You focus on preparing your character instead. Another benefit of this practice is that it sharpens your awareness of the present moment. When you imagine losing something, you begin to see it more clearly while it is still here. You stop taking it for granted. For example, imagine sitting quietly in your home. Normally your mind might wander. You might think about work, worries, or future plans. But if you imagine losing this home, even for a moment, the experience changes. The walls, the furniture, the silence, everything feels more meaningful. This awareness transforms ordinary moments into valuable ones. You no longer need dramatic experiences to feel grateful. The simple fact that things are as they are becomes enough. Negative visualization also strengthens your emotional independence. You stop depending so heavily on external circumstances for your happiness. You realize that many things you once thought were essential are actually optional. This realization gives you freedom. You are no longer tied to a specific lifestyle or set of conditions. You become more adaptable, more flexible, and more at peace with change. The practice also prepares you for moments of loss. When loss occurs without preparation, it feels shocking and overwhelming. But when you have already considered its possibility, the shock is reduced. The pain may still be there, but it is not accompanied by disbelief or panic, you think. This is difficult, but it is part of life. I knew this was possible. And that thought creates space for calmness, even in hardship. Negative visualization also encourages humility. When you imagine losing your achievements or status, you realize how temporary they are. You stop seeing them as permanent parts of your identity. You see them as circumstances that could change at any time. This humility keeps you grounded. It prevents arrogance. It reminds you to treat others with respect, regardless of your position. Over time, this mindset builds a deep sense of inner stability. You are no longer easily shaken by external events. You remain calm in situations that once would have caused panic. You become more patient when things go wrong. You become more grateful when things go right. You stop swinging between emotional extremes. This balance is one of the greatest gifts of negative visualization. It creates a steady mind in an unsteady world. Another transformation occurs in the way you approach challenges. Instead of seeing them as threats, you begin to see them as opportunities to test your character. Each difficulty becomes a chance to practice patience, courage, or wisdom. This perspective turns hardship into training. It gives meaning to struggle. It reminds you that your character is shaped by how you respond to adversity. Negative visualization also reduces the fear of embarrassment or failure. When you imagine failing, you realize that life continues afterward. You are still capable of learning, growing, and improving. This realization gives you courage to try new things. You become less afraid of making mistakes. You become more willing to take meaningful risks. Over time, this courage leads to growth. You gain new experiences, new skills, and new perspectives. And even when things do not work out, you feel a sense of peace. Because you acted with intention. Negative visualization also changes how you view success. Instead of seeing it as something permanent, you see it as something temporary. This perspective keeps you humble and grateful. You enjoy success while it lasts, but you do not cling to it. You understand that it may not last forever, and because you are prepared for its loss, you do not live in constant fear of it. This creates emotional freedom. You are not trapped by the need to maintain a certain image or lifestyle. You are free to adapt, to change, and to grow. The practice also deepens your sense of responsibility. When you imagine losing your health, you take better care of your body. When you imagine losing your relationships, you treat people more kindly. When you imagine losing your time, you spend it more wisely. This awareness leads to more intentional living. You stop drifting through your days. You start making choices that reflect your values. Negative visualization also helps you appreciate progress. When you imagine losing the skills or knowledge you have gained, you begin to see their value. You stop focusing only on what you lack. You start recognizing what you already have. This shift creates a healthier form of motivation. You are not driven by dissatisfaction. You are driven by appreciation and growth. Over time, the practice creates a deep inner peace. You are no longer terrified of loss, because you have already faced it in your mind. You are no longer shocked by difficulty, because you expect it. You move through life with a quiet readiness, ready for comfort, ready for discomfort, ready for success, ready for failure. And in that readiness, fear begins to fade. You stop clinging so tightly to what you have. You stop resisting the natural changes of life. You begin to live with open eyes and a steady heart. You appreciate what is here, without pretending it will last forever. You prepare for what may come without becoming anxious about it. This balance between appreciation and preparation is the essence of negative visualization. It is what makes the practice so powerful. It teaches you to value the present without clinging to it. It prepares you for the future without fearing it. And it strengthens your character so that no matter what happens, you can face it with calm, courage, and dignity. As negative visualization becomes a steady habit, you start to notice that your sense of control shifts inward. Before, you may have believed that control meant managing events, shaping outcomes, or ensuring that life unfolded according to your preferences. But through this practice, you begin to see that external control is always limited. No matter how carefully you plan, the world remains unpredictable. People change, circumstances shift, opportunities appear and disappear. The Stoic insight is that true control lies not in the events themselves, but in your response to them. Negative visualization strengthens this inner control. By imagining difficult scenarios ahead of time, you prepare your response. You think about how you would act, what you would say, and what principles you would follow. When the situation eventually arises, your reaction is not impulsive or emotional. It is guided by the reflection you have already done. This creates a sense of steadiness. You stop feeling like a leaf blown around by the winds of circumstance. You begin to feel like a person with roots, someone anchored in values rather than events. Another effect of this practice is that it softens your attachment to outcomes. Most people measure their happiness by whether things turn out the way they want. If they succeed, they feel good. If they fail, they feel miserable. But this makes their emotional state dependent on factors they cannot fully control. Negative visualization breaks this dependency. When you imagine both success and failure as possible outcomes, you stop tying your peace of mind to one specific result. You begin to focus more on the effort you put in and the integrity of your actions. You start to think, did I act wisely? Did I do my best? Did I remain true to my values? These questions replace the obsession with results. And because your actions are within your control, your peace of mind becomes more stable. This perspective also reduces the fear of trying new things. When you are not overly attached to outcomes, failure becomes less threatening. You see it as part of the process rather than as a personal defeat. Negative visualization also brings clarity to your daily priorities. When you imagine losing time, you become more careful about how you spend it. You begin to notice how much of your day is consumed by distractions, trivial worries, or habits that add little value. This awareness encourages you to simplify your life. You focus more on meaningful tasks and less on unnecessary ones. You become more intentional with your energy. For example, instead of spending hours worrying about minor issues, you might choose to invest that time in learning, with exercising, or connecting with someone you care about. You start making choices that reflect the limited nature of time. The practice also deepens your resilience in relationships. When you imagine misunderstandings, disagreements, or even separation, you become more patient with the people around you. You stop expecting perfection from them. You'll realize that relationships are fragile. They require care, understanding, and effort. This awareness encourages you to treat people with more kindness and respect. Instead of taking relationships for granted, you begin to value them more consciously. You'll listen more closely. You forgive more easily. You express appreciation more often. Negative visualization also reduces the fear of rejection. When you imagine someone saying no, or not appreciating your efforts, you realize that life continues afterward. Your value does not disappear just because someone does not approve of you. This understanding gives you the courage to be more authentic. You stop shaping your actions purely to gain approval. You start acting according to your principles. Over time, this authenticity creates a deeper sense of fulfillment. You feel more aligned with yourself. You are no longer pretending or performing. You are simply living according to your values. Another quiet benefit of negative visualization is that it increases your tolerance for discomfort. When you imagine difficult situations, your mind becomes more familiar with them. They feel less foreign and less intimidating. This familiarity makes real discomfort easier to handle. You stop panicking when things are not perfect. You adapt more quickly. You remain calmer under pressure. The practice also changes your relationship with possessions. When you imagine losing them, you realize how little they define who you are. You stop attaching your identity to what you own. You begin to see possessions as temporary tools rather than permanent sources of happiness. This shift reduces the fear of loss. It also reduces the urge to accumulate more and more. You become more content with what you have. You stop chasing unnecessary luxuries. You focus instead on building inner strength. Negative visualization also prepares you for moments of uncertainty. When you imagine different possible futures, you become more flexible. You stop clinging to one specific plan. This flexibility allows you to adapt when circumstances change. You are not thrown off balance when things do not go as expected. You simply adjust your course. This adaptability is one of the greatest strengths you can develop. It allows you to navigate life's unpredictability with calmness and confidence. The practice also deepens your appreciation for ordinary moments. When you imagine losing the simple comforts of daily life, they begin to feel more valuable. A quiet morning, a warm meal, a comfortable place to rest. These things become sources of gratitude. You stop overlooking them. You start appreciating them as small gifts. Over time, this gratitude becomes a steady background feeling. It does not depend on dramatic events. It comes from the simple awareness that what you have today is not guaranteed tomorrow. Negative visualization also reduces the fear of aging. When you imagine the alternative, losing the chance to grow older, you begin to see each year as a gift. Aging becomes something to appreciate rather than something to fear. You stop chasing youth as if it were the only valuable state. You start valuing experience, wisdom, and perspective. This shift brings peace. You accept the natural progression of life instead of resisting it. Another transformation occurs in how you handle mistakes. When you imagine failure ahead of time, it becomes less shocking when it happens. You are more prepared to learn from it. Instead of feeling crushed by mistakes, you treat them as lessons. You ask yourself what you can improve. You focus on growth rather than self-blame. This mindset makes you more resilient. You recover more quickly. You continue moving forward instead of becoming stuck in regret. Negative visualization also encourages courage. When you imagine losing opportunities, you become more motivated to take action. You stop waiting for perfect conditions. You realize that hesitation can lead to regret, and this awareness pushes you to act with intention. You start making decisions based on your values, not your fears. You pursue meaningful goals, even if they involve risk. Over time, this courage builds confidence. Not the kind that comes from constant success, but the kind that comes from facing challenges and surviving them. The practice also creates a deep sense of perspective. When you imagine losing everything, many of your daily worries start to look small. The things that once felt urgent or overwhelming begin to seem less important. You stop obsessing over minor inconveniences. You stop getting caught up in trivial conflicts. You focus more on what truly matters. This perspective brings a quiet sense of calm. You are less reactive, less anxious, and less easily disturbed. Negative visualization also prepares you for the ultimate uncertainty, the end of life itself. By acknowledging the possibility of death, you give greater meaning to the time you have. You stop assuming that there will always be more time. You start using your time more wisely. You invest in meaningful experiences. You nurture important relationships. You act according to your principles. This awareness does not make life darker. It makes it richer. It gives each moment more significance. And as this mindset grows, you begin to experience a deep inner peace. Not because life has become easier, but because you have become stronger. You no longer depend on perfect conditions for your happiness. You no longer fear every possible loss. You understand that change is part of life, and you are prepared for it. You move forward with a steady mind, ready to face whatever comes. And in that readiness you find a quiet, enduring sense of freedom. As this understanding matures, you begin to notice that your relationship with fear changes in a profound way. Fear no longer feels like an enemy you must constantly fight. Instead, it becomes something you observe, something you understand. You realize that fear often grows in the absence of clarity. It thrives in the unknown, in the unexamined corners of the mind. But when you bring those fears into the light through negative visualization, they begin to shrink. You start to see fear as a signal rather than a command. It tells you where your attachments lie. It reveals what you believe you cannot live without. And once you recognize those attachments, you have a choice. You can cling to them more tightly, or you can begin the process of loosening your grip. Negative visualization helps you loosen that grip gently. It does not demand that you give everything up. It simply asks you to imagine the possibility of loss. And through that imagination, you begin to realize that your happiness does not depend on any single thing. This realization brings a quiet form of courage. You are no longer paralyzed by the thought of losing what you have. You begin to trust in your ability to adapt. You understand that while loss may be painful, it is not the end of your story. Another transformation happens in the way you approach daily challenges. Instead of seeing them as interruptions, you begin to see them as expected parts of life. You no longer ask, "Why is this happening to me?" Instead, you ask, "How can I handle this well?" This shift in perspective turns obstacles into opportunities. Each difficulty becomes a chance to practice patience, discipline, or wisdom. Instead of feeling defeated, you feel engaged. You treat life like a training ground for your character. Negative visualization also reduces the fear of unpredictability. Many people crave certainty because it makes them feel safe. They want guarantees about their future, their health, their relationships. But life rarely offers such guarantees. By imagining different possible outcomes, you become more comfortable with uncertainty. You realize that even if the future does not unfold as you hope, you can still respond with strength and dignity. This realization frees you from constant anxiety. You stop trying to predict every possible problem. You focus instead on preparing your character. The practice also changes how you experience disappointment. When you expect life to be smooth, any setback feels like a failure. But when you expect challenges, setbacks feel normal. They become part of the process rather than signs of defeat. You begin to accept disappointment with greater calm. You adjust your plans. You learn from the experience. You continue moving forward. Over time, this resilience becomes part of your identity. You see yourself as someone who can endure hardship without losing composure, someone who can adapt to change without falling apart. Negative visualization also deepens your sense of gratitude. When you imagine losing something, you become more aware of its presence. You start to appreciate it more fully. This appreciation is not forced. It arises naturally from the awareness of Him. You recognize that what you have today may not be here tomorrow, and that recognition makes each moment more meaningful. You begin to savor simple experiences, a conversation with a friend, a quiet walk, a moment of rest. These things, once taken for granted, become sources of quiet joy. The practice also reduces the fear of failure. When you imagine failing, you realize that it does not destroy your ability to live with integrity. You can still learn, grow, and improve. This realization gives you the courage to take risks. You become less afraid of trying new things. You understand that failure is not the end. It is part of the journey. Negative visualization also strengthens your emotional independence. You stop relying so heavily on external circumstances for your happiness. You realize that many of the things you once thought were essential are actually optional. This awareness gives you freedom. You are no longer tied to a specific set of conditions. You can remain calm even when those conditions change. The practice also encourages humility. When you imagine losing your achievements, you realize how temporary they are. You stop seeing them as permanent parts of your identity. You begin to value character more than status. You focus on how you act, rather than how you are perceived. This shift brings a deeper sense of fulfillment. Negative visualization also prepares you for moments of loss. When loss occurs without preparation, it feels overwhelming, but when you have already imagined it, the shock is reduced. You may still feel sadness, but you are not completely shaken. You remain steady. You remember that loss is part of life. This steadiness allows you to support others as well. When someone around you is struggling, you are better equipped to offer calm guidance. Your preparation becomes a source of strength, not only for yourself, but for those around you. Another benefit of this practice is that it reduces impatience. When you imagine losing time, you become more appreciative of the time you have. You stop rushing through moments as if they are meaningless. You begin to treat time with more respect. You use it more wisely. You focus on what truly matters. Negative visualization also sharpens your priorities. When you imagine losing something, you begin to see its value more clearly. You start to distinguish between what is essential and what is trivial. This clarity helps you make better decisions. You spend less time on distractions. You invest more time in meaningful activities. Over time, this leads to a more intentional life. You stop drifting. You start choosing your actions with purpose. The practice also reduces the fear of aging. When you imagine the alternative, you begin to see each year as a gift. You appreciate the opportunity to grow older, to gain experience, and to learn. You stop resisting the passage of time. You accept it as part of the natural order. Negative visualization also changes your relationship with comfort. You begin to see comfort as something to enjoy, not something to depend on. You understand that comfort is temporary. This understanding makes you more resilient. When discomfort arises, you handle it more calmly. You know it is not the end of the world. Over time, this resilience becomes a quiet strength. You remain steady in situations that once would have caused panic. Negative visualization also encourages courage and decision. When you imagine losing opportunities, you become more motivated to act. You stop waiting for perfect conditions. You realize that time is limited, and this realization pushes you to live more intentionally. You take actions that align with your values. You pursue goals that matter to you. You express your thoughts honestly. Even when things do not work out perfectly, you feel a sense of peace because you acted with intention. The practice also creates a deep sense of perspective. When you imagine losing everything, many of your daily worries shrink. The things that once felt urgent begin to seem less important. You stop getting caught up in trivial conflicts. You stop obsessing over minor inconveniences. You focus more on what truly matters. This perspective brings calmness. You become less reactive, less anxious, less easily disturbed. Negative visualization also prepares you for the end of life. By acknowledging mortality, you give greater meaning to your time. You stop assuming there will always be more. You start living more deliberately. You invest your time in meaningful relationships and purposeful actions. This awareness does not make life darker. It makes it more vivid, more precious, more real. And as this mindset becomes part of who you are, you begin to experience a deep, steady peace, not because life is perfect, but because you are prepared for its imperfections. You no longer fear change as much. You no longer cling so tightly to what you have. You understand that everything is temporary. And in that understanding you find freedom. Freedom from constant anxiety. Freedom from unrealistic expectations. Freedom from the fear of loss. You move through life with a calm, steady mind, ready for whatever may come. And in that readiness you discover the true purpose of negative visualization. Not to make you fearful, but to make you unshakable.